All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our mystery object for today. We're going to make this little ride-on toy, and I like this little toy because there's a lot of round things happening. There's different pieces, parts, um, and I was able to go through and find some decent reference images for it as well. But before we even jump into the modeling, what I want to do is point out some very specific things about these images. So one of the first things that a lot of students like to do is they like to go out there and try to find as many reference images as they can to build their model from, and pull those into Maya on image planes and start working from those, and that's awesome. But it's really important to take a close look at these things before we start using them as our reference, because we start to get some irregularities that you want to be aware of before you jump in. So if anyone has questions about this, yes, I'm going to model the kid as well. That's why it's an hour and a half, Sean. If I start to come in and take a look at this image, and first it's, yeah, hey, awesome, a front view. I turn that off for a second. A front view, a rear view here. I've got a side view. I am set. I've got everything I need except for this. When I turn this on, what I'm pointing out to you is things that are existing in those images that tell me they are not true orthographics, meaning true front, side, or back. And I can see here the interior of the wheels, which tells me that there's lens distortion coming from the camera, which means that the front end probably isn't true in terms of the way it would really look if you were dead on from the front. Same thing on the rear here. And it also looks like these images are a bit fisheyed in terms of there's a bit of a wrap that you can see kind of creeping across. And I can tell that because if I look here, this is kind of rounding over a little bit. But if I come up here, it looks like it should be kind of straight on from some of these other angles. So some of these things are not playing nicely together. And here I can really see it with the wheels, how they look at their fisheye. They're kind of bending in. So knowing that, I know that none of these are actually accurate. They're within a ballpark, but they're not accurate, that I would want to pick one of them and start building directly off of that. So the other thing I'm going to look at really quickly, and this is something else that I love to do before I jump in and model something, is I look for what I call telltales or tell lines. These are things that I'm going to keep an eye on when I'm inside of Maya, when I'm working in my geometry, that are going to help keep me kind of on the right path. So here, if I look at this object up here, if I look at this car, it feels like there's almost a line coming from this little rivet line all the way to the back that starts to become kind of the center line of this particular piece of geometry. I also have these little tells up here, and these are things that are going to be very useful to me. What is the distance between this piece here and this right here? And then also on the bottom, what is the distance between this down to here? Now notice, if I turn this on, I have this distance and this distance. If I come and look at that front view again, notice how foreshortened this got. And again, it's because of the perspective. It's because it's pulling it forward, making it look like it's a little bit shorter than it actually is. Same thing here. I'm trying to look for lines where things kind of match up. Here kind of drops down. The beginning of this back tail fin is the beginning of kind of the front tail, the top tail fin here. The back corner of my wheel well kind of lines up with the back edge of this little kind of console piece that's up there. And again, my kind of through line that runs down the side. So having done all of that and looked through all of that, here's what's going to happen in terms of the way I'm going to approach this model. These are awesome little reference images in terms of they show me some things that I'm going to need to know, but these are going to be my key images. So every decision that I make on my model is going to be based off of these images with kind of supplemental influence by these down here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull all this into Maya. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks inside of there that can help with some of the image distortion that we're getting. So let me go ahead and minimize this and let's jump into Maya. All right. So now we're inside of Maya and we can see I have some image planes and I've got a bunch of stuff set up on layers here so I can do this pretty quickly. When I'm looking across all of this, we already talked about how these views aren't really great side profiles. Even though I can see a lot of it, there's distortion in them. There's something else that's happening. If I jump into my front view here, I'm sorry, the side view, you can see the wheel is kind of creeping up here, and this is kind of sitting almost on the ground plane. I would want the grid line. So a quick, easy way you can fix something like this that can kind of help to straighten this object out is I may come into this image plane and I want to make this a straight line across the bottom. So I'm going to grab these two vertices here, and what I'm going to do is essentially drop them down like this. And the reason this works is because it's a single polygonal plane. I've already had this mapped onto it. It was a square image I brought in, and I mapped it onto a square inside of Maya. So you can see that over here. Just made a square polygonal plane, and I mapped this image onto it using a shader. It's got everything in there. And then all I like to do is go through and I will cut it up like so. I'll just start dropping lines where I need to. And then, for instance, if I want to have this be separate, I can extract it out. I'm going to be using hotkeys throughout this. And I'm not going to really talk too much about the tools and things like that in terms of hotkey settings and whatnot. But this allows me to break everything up into separate pieces if I want to. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, depends on what we're doing. So I'm going to pull this off to the side like that. Anyways, you get the idea. So I did that over here, and I would do the same thing on this. I'm just grabbing this section. I'm going to drop this down just a little bit to get that to be sitting on the kind of the ground plane. And that corrected for some of that. It puts a straight line across the wheel hub here, which is something that's going to be useful. Then again, I have my two key images kind of up here off to the side. So once I start kind of cutting things up and scaling it around, I like to move my image planes around to get set up before I jump in. So if you do have any questions, again, you can go ahead and you can ask those questions. Sean is here and he is moderating the chat. He can go ahead and relay those to me as I go. But again, pull my image plane, cut it up, and what I'm going to end up with is something that looks like this. So I basically created a lineup for myself. And I took this image and moved it off to here because it's useful in seeing how this kind of seat opens up. I really like this one here. This is one of the key ones that I circled, and so was this. This is kind of a bit of an extra little bit up here, so I pulled it up to the top. Again, this one was skewed, but I kind of corrected it just a little bit. I'm keeping it here just because it is the closest thing I have to a side view, as long as I know it's cheated and as long as I know there's lens distortion on that image. So one more thing that I've done is I've made a duplicate of this particular image and I've angled it just a little bit. And I'm going to show you why I did that here in a second. So I've laid everything out in this row. So what I'm going to do is start working through some of my blocking. And I've already pre-done some of this. So I'm going to go through and just kind of show you the approach. And my hope is that as I'm going through, you can kind of see how I approach some of this. Again, if you're familiar with modeling, a lot of this is taught in our modeling classes that we teach here at UTD in the AHT Animation and Games program. Let me turn on this right here and make sure my image planes get a reference. So you should be able to tell that I started with a cylinder, and I started with something that was about 16 sides around for this particular shape. And I just kind of made this barrel shape by kind of pulling back the back end, adding some extra edge loops into it and scaling them out. And what I'm trying to get is that round kind of torpedo shape that this overall airplane has. And notice on the front, I'm leaving off this front piece right here. I'm not going to be gauging anything off of that for right now. I can add that on later on. All I want to do right now is kind of rough out my basic shapes. I've also roughed out where I think the wheels are going to sit, which is important because those are a key element that I'm going to be measuring things off of, as well as a half kind of cylinder that I've pulled across here to kind of mimic what this wheel well is going to be doing. So one of the reasons why I took this image back here, if I select it right there, I took this image back here, selected so it's easier to see, and I rotated it a little bit, is because I want it to match up to my angle of my camera as I'm looking around. So notice how if I don't have this one, I hide it, this now doesn't look correct relative to my camera. So if I look at a 3/4 angle, this is almost a 3/4 angle image of this particular object. But notice when I look at it, it starts to foreshorten just a little bit. So by having that same image and duplicating it and rotating it just a little bit, I get a little bit more true sense of where things are relative to what that image looks like. So essentially, I just rotated it to look a little bit more true to camera, which really only works for this one view. If I start looking at from other views, it'll start to change a little bit. But this is the one main view. Since this is the main view I'm modeling off of image-wise, I want to match that here as close as I can. So this piece right here, you should be able to tell, again, if you have any modeling experience at all, basically all I'm doing is duplicating this face and pulling it out, but I'm leaving everything separate. I'm not just grabbing this and doing an extrude on it to pull it out because I don't want anything connected at this point because I don't really know where things are going to go just yet. So again, I just selected that face, I duplicate that, pull it out just a little bit, and then extrude. So up here on the top, same thing. I just create a box and I'm kind of placing it about where I think it needs to go. And if I come down here to my front view, and I start looking at some of this, you can see here that it's matching up pretty closely. Right now, I'm just eyeballing things. I'm roughing everything in. It's a little bit off. So that is the basic beginning of my proxy. Now, every time I model something, I build a proxy first. And sometimes the proxy is more detailed. Sometimes it's super simple because I already kind of know how I'm going to approach things. But the proxy is all about getting scale and proportion. So the individual pieces parts that I have here right now, are going to help me get to that point. But what I need to do before I even go any further is, again, I need to go back to my images. So looking here, this is my key image. If I look down here, I have about this much space where it looks like the front or the back edge of this brown kind of cone stops here and extrudes back just a little bit, but it comes down and then kicks out into the bottom edge of the wheel well. If I look at what I have right now, this is not what I have, right? So I have this wheel well right now is going way too low. So what that tells me is something on my model needs to shift. And this is where we start just doing a ton of pushing and pulling, looking at our reference images and checking it out. This is one of the key steps I think that is skipped too often by people who just want to jump in and start modeling. I want to show you during the course of this hour and a half is that the closer you can get with your proxy, the easier it is for you to create the final model. So I have a couple of options here. I know this needs to be lower, so maybe I can start scaling this up just a little bit, and maybe I need to drop it down to something around there. And that could start to work. But remember, I talked about having a center line that goes all the way through kind of the mid of the object. And if I drop that down too far, it's going to start to kind of mess with that center line a little bit. But I'm going to try to start moving stuff around a little bit to see what happens here. And again, just doing some shaping. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time doing this. But what I want to show is that it's not actually a round shape that I have here, this torpedo shape. If I look really closely at this image, the bottom edge almost seems to flatten out just a little bit. It's not just rounding under. It looks like it rounds over the top, comes down, hits here, and then cuts really hard at a 90-degree angle across a flat bottom. If I look at some of my other images, again, this is another one of the images that I said was my key image. You can see that where it looks like the side kind of flattens out a little bit. It's not as round as this front. So the front is really round. As it's coming down here, it's straightening up on the sides. So what does that mean in terms of my proxy? Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead here to my second kind of level proxy that I have, which looks something like this. So now what I've done is gotten way closer to what I think the actual proportions are. And again, kind of eyeballing it based off of this image back here of where that seat scoop was going to sit into here. I'm not going to worry about that seat scoop just yet, but I'm looking at the handlebars here and I'm looking at, does this come in at the same angle that I'm seeing here? It looks pretty close. This looks pretty close. But here's the thing. This distance was one of the tells that I pointed out in Photoshop is about the same as what this is. And I'm really worried about this back edge of the front cone relative to where this starts. This looks pretty close. But the big key thing that I've done here on this particular piece is I've gone through and just started to slide some of my edges around to flatten the bottom out. So you can see it's really round in the front. I don't ever, in this case of this model, I know this is a round shape right here. And I want to maintain this front edge as being really round all the way around. But once I get beyond that one row out, I'm going to start to kind of change the shape up a little bit. You can see it's starting to flatten just a little bit towards the bottom. Then I kick things out even a little bit further. So now it comes over around, comes down and straightens out. On the bottom here, you can imagine if I turn on symmetry, this used to be something like this, the way it was spaced out. And all I'm doing now is pulling those edges outward closer to the corner basically that I'm trying to form up, which creates that flattening effect. I'm not worrying about holding edges, anything like that right now. I'm just getting the basic shape in this really rough, low poly version. Same thing kind of happens in the back. I want to make sure in the back here that I maintain this really nice round, because I know I have a nice round, it looks like a thruster cone that kind of sits on the back of it. That's perfectly round. So I want to keep that round, but as soon as it comes away from it, again, it's kind of rounding over and then squaring off. And again, just kind of playing with some of these shapes, moving them around, but looking at those distances. The other thing that I added here was this piece right here. Now that's not going to be something that I would actually model on, but it is a really good indication of space on the side of the object. So when I look here at the side image, which actually is pretty useful for this one, I can see a distance of about this much. What I want to try to do is eyeball it where I think this is probably about the same as that distance. And looking here, it looks like it's maybe about half of one of these stickers down before it hits the wheel well. So if I cut this in half and dropped it down, I'd see a half scoop that does something like that. And this feels like it's pretty close to that. If I don't have this, again, it makes it a little bit harder to eyeball some of what's going on. So let me pull that back up. And also in the front here, we talked about that little area that sits kind of underneath here. Hopefully you guys can see all this as I zoom in. That's sitting under here. I'm trying to mimic that as well by having an edge loop that kind of falls exactly where it's going to butt up against this piece. That's about the same distance as far as I can tell. Now, in real time, this probably took me an additional 20 or 30 minutes just to kind of keep scrutinizing everything and moving things around and playing with it, and getting everything to sit just the way I want. But again, all that time is going to pay off later on when I start to do my final geometry, because I don't have to worry about proportions. There's nothing worse in this case than starting off with like the seat on this object. You build the seat, but then all of a sudden everything is off because the seat wasn't correct to begin with. You need to work across the entirety of the model first, and then get into your details. All right, so we don't have any questions yet. We have thumbs up, so I'm going to keep going. If you do have questions, make sure you go ahead and put those in the chat. I don't even care if people open up their microphones and ask their questions. That's all fine with me. So I've got this proxy sitting there now. I've got the wheels roughed in. What I want to do is get into the next level proxy, which looks something like this. So what changed here? Well, let me pull up your proxy that I had in the last go around. And what I started to see was that this front edge comes up a little bit higher in this image. It felt like this needed to go higher up. When I look at my image at the same angle, I want this line right there where the seat is going to sit to come up and go just underneath the handlebars like it's kind of doing here. If you look at the previous version, it wasn't doing that. You can see the space that was there. So I knew that was off just a little bit. So I pulled those up and I adjust everything else as I'm going. And I adjusted more of the shape. I kind of lengthened some things out. I added in the blocking piece back here, which again, you can't really see unless I turn on my other image planes, but there's this square piece that sits right here and goes across the back that the rear axle sits in. You can also see it right here, cutting across. So we looked at that. Let's put this back on here. Oops, let's go back into this model. So I'm pretty happy with what I've got going. So now what I want to do is jump in and show you how I'd approach modeling some of this. Is there any questions about the proxy process so far? No questions. Yeah, you can also go in there and try to fix one of the suggestions was that you can go in there and you can try to fix in Photoshop for the lens distortion and whatnot. I don't ever spend that much time trying to fix those images because I know they're wrong to begin with. So you can only get them to be so close. What I would rather do is build up the skills or have you build up your skills to be able to look at something like this and to be able to hit it with just a 3/4 image. If you're modeling on a show, let's say if you're working on a feature film or a TV show or even a game, most of the time you're not getting orthographic views. You're not getting a front, a side, a top, whatever. You're only getting a 3/4 or like a simple sketch of something and you're expected to go in and build it out. So this is where I think developing your eye and being able to do that and extract that information off of something like a 3/4 view is really important. So let's go in and start talking about building out this front cone because this thing doesn't look like the actual object until we have that. So I'm going to turn this off for a second. You could go through, and I think a lot of people might think you could go through and you could do it with a cylinder, which you absolutely can. And this had about 16 sides around. So if I did something like that, and I could take this, I'm going to rotate it really quickly. And I'm going to move this over like this, and I would pull this up, right? And I would scale this whole thing out until I matched up the size. And I'm not going to do this because I'm going to actually build it another way. I just want to show this as an example. I would pull this up until it sat correctly. You know, something like this, and then some people may grab all of this and merge this down, but this is not good geometry. All of these points coming together is nasty. It's not good. Too many triangles. It's not clean. So what I'm going to do is approach this differently, and I'm going to do it with a box. So I'm going to create a box. I'm going to pull this thing over like so. And I might go in and do let's go ahead and do something like a poly smooth on this. So I'm going to go up under mesh. Let's go to poly smooth. And I got something that looks like that with 3 divisions. That's not very good. Let's try it with 2 divisions and see what happens. It just so happens that when I do this, it equals 16 sides around. Knowing and understanding your math a little bit helps in terms of how your edges are all going to connect together. So I'm going to scale this thing up.
Hey, Todd, we have a question from Helena.
Sure thing. So how many references would you normally work with, or does it So, okay, so the references, I use as many as I can get, but most of it, I only need one really good reference image. That's going to be my key. Everything else just kind of helps to give me additional information that might help with little things. But you always want to try to find as much reference as you can. The thing that happens is that you might have to find some reference that's not quite exactly the same object, but is close to it. That works a lot too, to help you kind of get further along faster. So I have this quad ball now. I took that cube and I smoothed it. Now I have a quad ball that looks something like this. And this looks nothing like that cone, right? But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that shape and I'm going to come in from the front view and I'm going to turn off X-ray for a second. And I'm going to scale it up and move it down ever so slightly. So it's something like that, which is now pretty well lined up with the other piece. If you look at it across the center here, things are looking okay. But again, it's really, really round. Well, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go through and use my friend, the lattice deformer, which I use all the time. And I'm going to take this, grab these points, and I'm going to scale this whole thing down like so. And I'm going to pull it back in like this. So we have a couple of visitors walking through our suite right now. So I actually scaled it in one direction. What I want to do is scale this whole thing, turn symmetry off. That's what's causing my problem that I had right there. Take this, I'm going to scale this all down like so. Something like that. And now I'm going to pull this back. And now I've gone ahead and I've got that object. I'm going to take this. Once I'm happy with that, make sure it matches up to my reference images. And again, my reference images aren't going to really show me what I need to see because they're skewed and they're distorted. So I just need to kind of eyeball this. And I'm going to do that by going back to this view, kind of looking at it. It feels like maybe it needs a little bit more shaping, but I'm going to go ahead and roll with this for right now, just for the sake of time. Once I got what I want, delete the history. And here's the benefit of using the quad ball. When I smooth this out, and if I turn off my lines here, it gives me that nice cone on the end with no triangles coming together. So it's really nice and clean. You'll notice that it kind of pinches right now. It needs to be a little bit more round of a shape. I would go in and slowly start to scale things out, kind of add some of that roundness in after the fact. If I smooth this out, you can see it fits in pretty good. You can see the flattening that's happening there, which is why I am going to have to round this eventually, but I'll get to that later. But that's the general approach that I would take for something like that. Now, if I was happy with this overall shape, most of the time I don't start with my proxy geometry as being the base of my final geometry. But in this case, I've already shaped it quite a bit. So I am going to go ahead and do that. And what I always like to do is to duplicate things. And I'm going to hide the original so I can always go back to it. Next thing we want to try to get on this object is the seat, which I am going to try to use this kind of faux side view that I have here. And the way I'm going to approach that is to basically draw in what I want and then reshape my geometry to fix or to match. So I'm going to go through and use my multi-cut tool, and I'm going to use the draw portion of it. And let's just go ahead and place something here to start. Now, what I'm looking at for the beginning of this kind of cutout that I have to make is what is the distance between this console piece to the back edge there. And for me, for right now, I think it's probably someplace right about here. Once I have that, I'm going to come in here and just start to draw on that shape. But notice how far off I am from what this one image is right there. And I'm just going to start to draw this in to where I think it feels about right. I'm going to come up to maybe something like here, there, and maybe something like that. In fact, I think I'm just going to try to come up straight into something like this. Again, I'm working kind of fast here. When I do this, I'm also going to get rid of one side of my object. I'm going to work with just half of my object. I'm going to grab all these faces, like so, and I'm going to extract them out. So I can hide that out. And this is what I'm left with. Now there are problems here. And when I look around it, you can probably tell what the problems are. So I'm going to have to clean this mess up somehow. I have an n-gon right here. So I have this, this, and this. That's 5 points around. I have a triangle kind of sitting here. I've got something happening, same kind of thing over here. So how do I go about fixing all of that? I don't want to delete anything at this point. What I want to do, if I start deleting points, like for instance, if I came in and started moving stuff like this around, it's going to change the shape of my object, and I don't want to change the shape of my object. What I want to do is create for myself a nice holding edge that wraps around this entire shape. Hopefully, if you've taken any kind of modeling classes or whatnot, you know what the idea of a holding edge is. And the holding edge is going to allow us to have a really nice smooth surface that's maintained when the object is smoothed out. So let's try to add something like that in. So I'm going to start up here. And what I'm going to do is just kind of draw around my object like so, getting a consistent kind of thickness to this holding edge. To be something like that, maybe. Once I've got that, I can start to come in here and say, I maybe don't need this. I want to get rid of it. Coming down here, I still have this triangle, and I'm going to address that here in a minute. Something I can do, though, is I can look at this and say, this is going back too far. It's too straight. I need this point to drop down here. So I'm going to start moving things around just a tiny little bit, kind of reshaping some of this. Like so. And I'm going to do the exact same thing kind of up in this area here. I may not even need this coming in. I have to start to look around my geometry and start asking myself, what do I see? What can I potentially move around? And in this case, I'm going to slide this point over a little bit. I might move this up because what I see is this. If I was to take this edge and run it to here, I may be able to come in and delete this out. And now I've got this face kind of wrapping down into here. If I was to take this point and slide it back a little bit, it kind of wraps into that shape. Now I've started to clean up my geometry. So when I look at this, I still have my nice clean shape, but now I've got this holding edge wrapping around it. Now it doesn't look great just yet because it's stretching over to this direction, and we'll fix some of this stuff here in a few minutes. But what to do with this one back here? This is a little bit of a different situation. So I don't want to run this back this direction, although I kind of have to. What I'm going to try to do instead is figure out, is there another direction I can run this, or multi-directions? Again, I can't explain all of this, and I know it's kind of it's a lot to see someone or to hear someone talking about modeling when they're going through it. It's kind of boring. But what I'm going to do to fix this essentially is drop an edge loop here. And one thing that I like to have turned on when I do some of these things is I use the insert edge loop tool. And I open up the tool options box, and I have right now insert with edge flow, which actually goes through. I can show you up here. If I use insert edge loop and I drop that, it's going to scale it out just a little bit to kind of match kind of in between what's already existing. So that can be kind of a nice thing here. If I drop something like that there, then I'm going to come back here and drop another one, maybe right about here. Once I've done that, I'm going to connect this up, because if I look really closely now, I can get rid of this, and I've worked myself kind of out of that jam. If I want, I can come in. I'm going to round some of these things. I'm a stickler for this kind of stuff where I want everything nice and neat, nice and kind of rounded over. But now I've got this nice shape. And again, it was a triangle. I've essentially added another row here, here, and kind of ran it backwards, ran it down. And what I'm noticing is that I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It may be useful here because this is going to be pulling quite a bit. I'm going to come in and add an edge loop here, and I may add another one maybe somewhere around here, and then get rid of this original one. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now I can come in and shape this even a little bit more. I'm going to drop some of this down ever so slightly, and because I have that new edge, I can take this and I can pull it back this direction to help ease that. It was tugging quite a bit to this side. I didn't quite like that, so I'm going to ease it by pulling it this way. And now I have that nice, neat holding edge going around. If I don't like what's happening here, which I really don't at this point, I could come in and add an edge loop right there. But for right now, I'm going to leave that front edge because I don't really know what's going on with it just yet. And whatever I add through, if I add another edge loop going down here and here, it's not going to affect anything back here. So if I smooth this out right now, that's feeling pretty good. And just to show you how this would work then, let's go ahead. I'm going to grab this and I'm going to mirror this across. And select all this. I'm going to merge points. So now I have one whole object. Oops, forgot. I got to combine first. And then I'm going to merge my points. Now I have this nice object. All right, so what I'm going to do next, just to kind of show you how this might work, is to come in here. I'm going to grab this entire edge. I'm going to extrude it, and I'm just going to pull it down and in like so. And that's going to act as like the inner lip of what the shape may end up being. So when I smooth this out, I turn off my wireframe. Now I've got a nice, even kind of cut in that goes all the way around. Once I have that, that's going to serve as the basis when I build my seat as well. I'm going to start with that outer edge and build my seat from that. But notice now as I look around it, it's starting to come together in terms of I got that cut in. It still looks nice and neat. If I look around this, I use a Fong shader on this right now so I can see the highlight, but I don't see any crazy irregularities. I do think the front edge here is feeling a little bit long now, so I'm going to end up pulling some of this back. And this is just where we start having some shaping fun. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to slide this back ever so slightly. I may take this also, slide it back. And at this point, I am going to go in and add some more geometry up here because I'm starting to see some pretty evenly spaced faces back here. But if I look up here, these are really long, and then it goes back into small, and I don't like that. Quick, easy way to try to fix this might be to use something like the offset edge loop tool, which allows me to come in and drop those edge loops where I want them to go. And I think, if I remember right, if I go into offset edge loop, this also has insert with edge flow. So if I turn that on in the options box and I come in and I have it set to a hotkey, if I drop this in right now, you should see those edges adjust. And they kind of did. It wasn't super great, but I can always go in and I can adjust those manually after the fact, which is probably what I'm going to have to do. No matter what you end up doing, you always have to go through and make sure that your shapes are staying nice and neat. So here I'm going to scale these out just a little bit. You can see it's maintaining some of that. Luckily enough, if I just take some of this and do a scale on it, it pretty much fixes any issues I'm going to have there. I might want to scale this out just a little bit further. Do something like that. I don't like the way that this point is sitting right now, so I'm going to start to ease some of that by just simply pulling it forward ever so slightly. You can also see back here, I'm going to turn my symmetry back on. So I could take something like this and ease it back, ease this back, come down here and do the same thing. Because what I'm trying to do is keep these lines as straight as I can. Hopefully this isn't the world's most boring modeling demo. Looks like people are still here, which is good. My goal though is to show you kind of this is how to approach building some of these things, and some of it is just a matter of you have to kind of see it in order to understand it. So I'm going to tweak out some more of this stuff. Again, I'm making sure I keep this front edge really nice and round. Always maintaining those forms. So now when I look at it, I've rounded that out a little bit. There might be a couple little flat spots here and there, but this is looking pretty cool. Sean is here. He's here. If you have any questions, make sure you go ahead and ask. And now I can come back in and I'm going to scale this down just a little bit because it looks like it got scaled down. Oops. I turn symmetry off to do that. Scale this down just a little bit, pull this back. And again, I'm just going to kind of shape this using the scale tool. I scale the whole thing up a little bit. I'm going to come in, scale these up a little bit, and then I'm just going to do the same thing from the opposite view, where I'll probably take these out a little bit and then come back in, grab this stuff, scale it out a little bit, smooth that, and it should be a little bit more round, sure enough. And I think that's starting to look kind of cool. You will notice one thing about a quad ball. Yeah, I'm throwing tons of stuff out there, Sean, tons of stuff. So if I create a cube like this, and I started this off with a quad ball, the one thing you need to be aware of, if you've taken any of my modeling classes, you've already kind of been aware of this. When I smooth this out and you look at it from the front, this is not a perfectly round shape. So if I was to come in and get rid of that, and I look at this from the front, it's actually still kind of squared off on the sides. And that's why it doesn't quite fit the opening that I have right now from that nice cylinder shape that I started with. So an easy way to fix that is to just go ahead. And again, this is where math comes into play. I'm going to take these points and I'm simply going to snap them. So I'd go around the whole thing, snap the point. Again, not an exciting thing, but this will help a ton to make sure everything lines up exactly the way that I want. And I may need to go in and tweak some more stuff when I'm done with this, just in terms of making sure that these internal bits here will probably also need to be shaped a little bit in terms of my vertices. We got a quiet crowd, Sean. But now it looks nice and round, but you can see how it's off. So this is where, again, turning symmetry on can help. And I'm going to use my scale tool for these. What I want to do is get some of that roundness back into these points. Lots of little details like that, but that's what's going to end up making this model look really nice and neat. So that matches up perfectly now. Kind of round it out. You can see I introduced some artifacts I'd have to go in and smooth, but again, you kind of get the idea of how I would do that. All right, so we've got that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was this back fin here, which is a bit of a tricky bit. This is an injection molded or a blow molded toy, which means that that body piece, that red piece, is all one piece of plastic that was, it's probably a blow mold actually, that was kind of blown out, and it creates that shape. So I can't have any seams on that. So I would never leave this piece just jammed in. So that's going to have to be stitched in. And if I look at my reference image again, you can see that. You can see that little highlight right there. If I was to make that a stick-on piece, it will never look correct. So I'm going to have to go in and actually stitch that in somehow. Same thing happens back here on this piece. And it looks like it kind of is flat on the sides and it rounds down in the shape and then kind of down this way. So what I want to do next is kind of look at some of that. And here's a case where this view actually does help me a little bit, where I can see the side kind of rounding down and then in. So I've kind of blocked this shape right now with this piece right here. But what I need is for it to have a cascade down into this. Looking at the side view, you can see that everything underneath this kind of fin is cut out. There's a chunk taken out of my model. So what I want to do is figure out where that falls, kind of cut some of my model away, and then we'll start working from that. So the easiest way to do that is to look at my reference again. I'm going to have to judge it off of these side views, which isn't very good, but let's look for some landmarks. If I drop down from the front here, the front of where I think that tail fin is, comes down. This looks like it's a little bit more in front than that. So I'm going to kind of use that as my guide. This kind of matches up. So I'm going to say this piece probably needs to come forward just a little bit. I'm going to pull this forward just a little bit. And I'm going to drop a line straight down from there. So we turn symmetry off. Maybe it's something like this. And then that would connect kind of underneath here. And now's a good time again to go back, get rid of half of my object. Like so. So that I can come in and basically get rid of this stuff right here. Essentially punching a hole into my object that's going to kind of serve as what I need to be doing here. May not be the right angle. We'll find out here shortly. If you want to make sure it's really straight, something else I can do is just come in with this draw tool, come all the way down like this. And I drew across all those faces at one time, and maybe that's what I want. Again, I'm not too concerned right now because of time. So we're going to go through, and then I'm going to get rid of this line right there. And again, I'm a stickler for this kind of stuff. I want to make that straight, so it drops straight down into that curve. And now I have something that sits like this. All right, cool. So what are we going to do next? Well, we need to kind of pull this part forward and then down. So how's that going to happen? Well, it looks like I'm going to have to come in and just start shaping this box. Now, usually I'm going to work with planes. I don't like to work with things with volume, but I am going to work with a volume in this case by simply pushing and pulling some points on this box to kind of get what I want. But to me, it's kind of hard to see what's going on here. So I'm going to come in and get rid of this. And I'm going to get rid of all that interior stuff and just kind of leave the top, the back, and the side. Yeah, quad ball, Sean says. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to connect this down into here. just to see what happens. So let's take these pieces. In fact, I'm just going to grab this piece right here. Let's turn on my edge. Let's grab that, extrude this down, pull this down to here. And I'm not connecting it just yet. I'm just going to use snap to kind of put it into position. And that's essentially what it does. It comes down, it wraps into there. And if I look at the shape of it, it has a bit of an arc to it. So I'm going to go in and maybe add another edge loop. I don't like the way that one fell, so I'm going to use the multi-cut tool and draw in what I want. And I'm still going to pull this up a little bit. Again, I can shape this however I want at that point. But that gives me kind of that bend that comes up off the bottom, which isn't too bad. Now, where is that going to go? It wants to go someplace in here. How do I connect all this stuff up at this point? I think for right now, since I don't really know just yet, I'm going to start just adding some bits and we'll see what happens. Let's pull this down a little bit, always shaping as we go. So I have a triangle basically. If I look at this right now, I have a triangle that sits here. So I also append across these. I have a triangle that sits there and I'd have a triangle down there. That's not really clean geometry. But looking around, this is where you kind of have to camera scout almost with your model. What are you going to be able to do? It looks like I might be able to take some of this and run it back over to here. If I was to add another edge loop, maybe someplace about there, and I'm probably going to have to go in and scale it. You guys have kind of seen some of this as we go. I'm not going to scale it just yet because I only have half of my object and it gets a little bit difficult to do that. But I'm looking for ways to tie all this stuff together. So if I take maybe this back here and pull this over, I could take those points, I'm going to merge them together, and I'm going to take this and just kind of pull it back up. Oops, those pieces were combined. I didn't build all this beforehand, so I'm kind of doing this free form right here. So I am going to have to stitch this piece in right now. So what I'm going to do is just take that point and let's just snap it to this point for right now. And we're going to take this and I'm going to snap it into this point. And just for fun, we can delete this face. Nope, I can't delete that face. This is modeling, right? I don't know where this is going to go right now. So what I'm going to do is come in and redraw some of this and maybe drop it down to do something like that, which allows me to come in and get rid of this. And now it's still running to the back the way I want. And now that I've done that, I should be able to come in, take this point and snap it over to here. Okay, now I can take those and I should be able to merge them. Once I take this shape and this shape, I'm going to combine those. Now I can take these and I can merge them together. So that is merged up. I'm going to come back over here, draw this down. I'm going to draw this over to here, maybe something like so. And I'm going to get rid of this face under here. I may come to regret some of this here in a few minutes. We'll find out. Stitch that together. Move this point up, kind of reshaping. I'm going to take this and maybe I end up pulling some of this down. This shape stays pretty square through here and then it drops straight down. So if I take this point right now and I snap it, so I'm using my snap to point, take that, merge all that stuff together. If I delete this triangle, all of a sudden I've created something that looks like this. And maybe that's what I want because now I can take this point and pull it up. And that gives me a little bit of that squaring that I'm really after. And then it's going to come across. And so now I have to figure out what I'm going to do here, which is another little problem. But I've got the top kind of working the way I want. So if I look at this right now, it's kind of smoothing over. It's dropping down this direction. This is going to hold that shape. What else can we do here? So just going to use the multi-cut tool. And again, this is where it gets kind of boring. So I apologize if it's boring. No questions. Everyone's just sitting me, watching me model. The most boring thing in the world to sit and watch someone do while they're talking about it. Any questions at all? I'm going to cut this as well. And maybe I take this up like so. I can append here to here. I get rid of that. Ooh, nice. Ooh, now I've got two triangles. Check this out. I've got a triangle here and a triangle here. Can anyone tell me what two triangles equals? One quad. Good, Donna's cheering me on, doing great. So what's a quad? Well, a quad is basically a four-sided object, right? So I'm going to drop a line here to here, because if I know it's going to form a quad, I can grab those 2 points and I can merge them and check out what it did. Creates this nice little shape down here, which also needs to be stitched together. So I'm going to take those points and merge them. Looks like I've got some funky geometry going on, so let's take a look at that. See right there, I'm just going to grab all these points and try to merge them. There it goes. And now I've kind of created that shape. But there's a problem, right? And there's always a problem. That's part of the fun of doing this kind of stuff. I think it's part of the fun of doing this kind of stuff. So how do I fix this problem? Well, the problem is it needs a holding edge to go around the top, right? If it doesn't have a holding edge, it's going to kind of bleed. You can see it bleeding out right now. It kind of bleeds up, it bleeds out. I want to confine that shape. So I'm just going to go in really quickly. And again, I'm going to draw in my nice holding edge where I want it to go. Making a triangle up here. I'll show you why here in a second. And this is going to come to the back. Now all this stuff in the back here is going to cause me to lose my round shape. I'm going to have to get that back manually later on. Merge this together like so. Pull this up just a little bit. That's my holding edge there. And notice how much cleaner that is now. I'm starting to get a nice edge holding there. Ideally, I would have another one running on the inside. So I'm probably going to do that while I'm at all of this. Come down this direction, come through here, down into here. I don't like the way some of this stuff is sitting now, so I'm just going to kind of move it out ever so slightly. Maybe something like that. You can see some of my faces are moving around and doing some not nice things like this. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. I might take this one down a little bit. Pull this up a little bit. But now I've got a really nice little kind of edge holding that out. Wrapping down underneath the way I would like, kind of, sort of. I'll probably change some of that up too. Knowing that I also need to have another holding edge that is going to fit along this edge and kind of go down. So little by little, we're going to get this thing to do what we want it to do. I don't want to use insert edge loop because you can see I dropped it down and went all the way through. I don't really know how this is going to stop on this one, so I'm just going to go ahead and manually add it in, leaving a hole for myself, a gap right here that I'll fill in. That's an end gun I'll have to take care of later on when I know what's going on. But now I'm starting to see the shape that I want. It needs a lot of shaping. So what I'm going to do is take these points here and just start to get that fin shape that I really want. You can see this had this little slope, this little angle to it. I'm going to adjust that. Again, looking at my reference images as I go. I'm not really looking at them right now simply because of time. So we're going to keep pulling some of this stuff back. And I'll probably do the same with this. There we go. And now I've got that shape. It's kind of there, kind of, sort of. We would take the exact same approach with this front piece up here. And again, if you understand what you're doing and how many edges that you're using for certain things, it can make your model making a lot easier. So in this case, I want to look at the wireframe of these two pieces. And I noticed that this row comes down and almost hits this row almost hits that row, and this row kind of almost hits this row. What I'm going to end up doing, and this is for the sake of my model, is I'm going to slide this piece back just a little bit because I want it to line up as close as I can to this edge that comes down. So I may even cheat this, let's do a little bit more. I'm going to cheat it because it simply makes my life easier. I'm going to draw onto this shape what I want in terms of how this is going to connect. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to draw over to something like this. And I'm going to use the multi-cut tool here. I'm going to draw down to something about there. And then we'll come down to the bottom edge here and something like that. That's going to be the outer kind of portion of this shape. I'm going to do the same thing here, draw from here over to this corner, down to something like that, and then down to something right about there. So once I've done that, now I can come in and I'm going to get rid of all this stuff right here. Because if I do that, now I've got the opening that I want. And I'm going to finish this off by coming through and drawing this out. This is fun. I like building stuff that I haven't built before because it's a challenge. And I'm just kind of, like I said, freestyling with this thing. So I'm not quite sure where all this stuff is going to go, but it's actually working out okay so far. I have a problem here that I'm going to simply redraw my mesh where I want it to go. So I'm going to draw this up. That's going to do something like that. Ooh, what am I going to do with this piece here? Let's figure that out. So this is going to have to go somewhere. What I might be able to do is something like this. I wrap that up. This. I might be able to take that and wrap it up into there. And if that's the case, I may not want this edge to be quite as straight as what I had. I'm going to put some of that bow kind of back into it. Might be able to do something like that. That kind of works, but that's going to take this edge away, which I don't really like. Yeah. Again, we're thinking on the fly here. The other thing that I probably am going to end up doing then, since I didn't like what was happening there, is to redraw this where it comes straight down like I had initially. Just something like that. Got to keep track of which edges I don't want. And I'm going to take this edge straight up. So we're going to take this straight up into something like this. And again, these are going to get closer together here, which means I'm going to have to go through, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to rework some of those to make sure things kind of sit where I want it to. I'm going to get rid of these. And now I've got this triangle that's kind of sitting there. I know I want to maintain this point down here. So what I may need to do is take something like this. And maybe I can try to get away with that. I'm not sure about that. But if I don't like what's happening with it, again, I can sheet this just a little bit, pulling this up. What I may end up doing is just dropping this down like so. And kind of having it flare up a little bit. And then run this kind of through, and then now I'm just kind of working through everything to try to see if this shape will work. Tell is when you turn all this stuff off, that actually looks okay. I think I can probably get away with something like that. There's a little bit of a pucker that's happening here. You can see how it's kicking in just a little bit. So I'm going to come in and grab this point and pull it back out. To kind of keep that round, I have to pull that one out just a little bit further. But I'm going to add a holding edge, and that will also help with some of this. Now I'm just going to finish this off really quick by taking this up into there, getting rid of that. Oof, I don't like how that's going up. Always reworking what we have. That's the basic idea, right? Once I've got that, now I can probably stitch these two things together. What I'm going to do is trace around this shape now, so that I can go ahead and get rid of what I don't need. So it's going to be something like this. A lot of people may want to try to use a Boolean for stuff like this. Booleans are really not clean. So unless you know what you're doing with a Boolean, I would not recommend using them. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'll keep that for right now. So you guys can probably guess what's going to happen next. Super repetitive, right? I keep doing the same things. Oops. I got to fix this little piece right here. This one's going to be way easier to fix because notice how my edges aren't matching up is what I mean here. What I'm going to do is take this in, something like that. Then this one, I'm going to try to probably have to add another edge loop that goes through here, which is going to ruin my round shape, but I'll have to go in and fix that later. So let's try something like this. Before I stitch all this stuff together, I'm going to put a holding edge around the entirety. Again, it's kind of those same things over and over and over. And I keep saying the same things over and over and over. If you've never tried talking like this while modeling, I don't recommend it because you run out of things to say about what you're actually doing because it's kind of boring to watch. So like I said, hopefully this is helpful. I don't want to end that in a triangle, so I am going to take this and push this line out a little bit. So I can get rid of that. Same thing that we did before. I'm going to grab these, merge that together, pull this up ever so slightly, come back to this one, merge to center. And now I'm going to take this and let's combine these two pieces.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah.
We have a question from Donna.
What? Will you cover how to fix that round edge from those vertices being too close together? Okay, which round edge? Oh yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. You're talking about on the front or the back, right? Where I've had to add rows in and all of a sudden it's not round anymore. Yep, all right, so that's the next thing we're gonna do here. So I'm gonna kind of leave this where it is for right now. Again, I'd probably have to run some of this down through here maybe, but let's tackle that. So if I start to have these extra edges coming in and it starts to ruin that round shape, the nice thing that I had going for me, because I was a little bit smart before, is I made the outside edge of this cone perfectly round, if you remember. So I know if nothing else, the outside edge of this is perfectly round. If it wasn't, I would create a cylinder and bring it in to use it as a template, right? Just a cylinder shape. So I would bring in something like this, and I would have the same number of sides. So this was 16 that I used to start. I would rotate this down. And what I would do is just get rid of everything but that front, center up my pivot. And there's really no magic to any of this. What I'm going to do is scale this up. And what I would do is kind of place this to match up, right? And when I smooth that out, hitting the 3 key, it gives me a really nice round edge that I would use. And what happens then on something like this is you have to basically go in and let me just do an example here. I'll kind of got multiple things showing now. Get rid of that. Let's come back into here. What I would have to end up doing is coming in and saying, okay, if I want this to be round, I'm going to take this point and literally try to match it up so that when it's smoothed, I'm trying to match it up to that round shape. So you basically create a template for yourself that's round, and then you start to move things around a little bit until you get that round shape. And you can usually get it pretty close if you have enough geometry. But sometimes in a shape like this, the problem that I run into is I have an irregular kind of edge running right through here. I've got this edge down here. I don't know if I need this edge as of yet, but I need to end this shape somehow. So, this was my original edge. I could try to do something like this. Again, this isn't the cleanest example, but I may not need that edge right there. And then what can happen is I can take this point and pull it up. If I look at the front of this thing again, it looks like it's almost straight across there. I can see it does cut straight across. This round comes down into it. So I think what I'm going to try to do is split the difference on this and snap this here, merge that up. We're just going to cheat this because I don't really know for sure. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit. I'm going to come in here and pull this down just a little bit. Again, if it's not perfect, most of the time, unless someone's really scrutinizing it, they're never going to be able to tell. That feels okay. If I smooth this right now, you can see how it does wrap underneath. That's kind of what I want. You can see the back edge here. Now this is going straight across too. There's something else I need to look at. When I look at this, it feels like it kind of has a bow to it. It starts a little bit higher on the ends and sags in the middle. If I look at my side view here, you can't really see it because of the skewing. So let's go through and look at any other view that we can see. All right, so I'm going to take some license here because it's going to help my model out just a little bit and it'll make it look a little bit cooler. I'm going to pull these points up, which gives it a little bit of a bow. And what I might do is keep this one a little bit lower, keep the front a little bit higher. But it's going to give me this rounded shape right there. But I need that to come down on the back so it matches up to this point right there. However, I'm going to grab everything on the bottom here that I already have, and I'm going to pull all this up. I'm going to pull this up, and I'm going to take all of this and pull it up just a little bit too. So that I can try to grab this and this. Actually, let's just. We're going to do this as well. I'm going to need a holding edge down here at the bottom at some point, right? To help keep this from rounding so much. So instead of creating something new, what I'm going to do is grab all of this stuff and drop it down. And the reason for that is because now it falls where I need it to fall for this wheel well. So again, you're kind of splitting the difference on some of this stuff. I keep saying that, but you kind of have to pick and choose and move stuff around, and it may or may not work out, but I'm going to try this because it makes it easier for myself. And again, I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to tell when they look at it. So let's do that. And then I can even come in and take this bottom, take these faces. I'm going to pull them up just a little bit to create that flat section there. And I want this to come down farther because I don't want it to cut up like it's doing right now. Let's do that. It's going to look better. The nice thing is once you've built a couple things that are similar, like I built things that are maybe a little bit similar to this, not this shape or this object, you start to kind of figure out what you can do. And it makes it easier for yourself because you have a base of knowledge that you're working from, which is really key to doing this stuff and doing it quickly. All right. It's like I should be seeing some imperfections in my surfaces at any point now. This is nasty. I don't like this. So one of the things that I'm going to do is just go ahead and get rid of this because what I want is a holding edge. So I'm going to grab this. Let's do an extrude, and I'm going to scale this down right away. I'm going to drop it down like so. And this is what's going to help control and give me that little bit of a round going onto the corner. If I pull up my reference images, it's a pretty broad kind of round shape there on the edge. And I need to make sure that I have something that feels like that on the model. So I'm going to scale this down, just drop this down just a little bit. And the way I'm going to finish this shape off then is not do another extrude. I'm going to append across here like so. Uh-oh. Oh, that's because, so why did that happen? Because I only had that element selected. It hid everything else. It's still all together. That's why all my other kind of pieces, parts disappeared on the main body for a second. So let's append across here. And I should be able to come in and I might be able to cut here. And if I append one more time, I'll get something that looks like this. But I know from experience that's probably not going to be enough to kind of round out. It's going to flatten if I do that, because ideally what I'd like to do is take this shape and I would like to pull it out a little bit. And then I would come in and also take this and kind of pull it out a little bit so it starts to round over. But I think this is too broad. So I'm going to go back and let's delete these faces out, making sure I have anything else selected. I'm going to extrude in one more time. So I'm going to grab all of this. Let's do another extrude. I'm going to scale this in. Let's pull this down to something like so. And now I'm going to use that exact same trick of appending. Coming in, cut, let's append again to something like this. So the benefit of doing that now is I can grab this and pull this out ever so slightly. And then I can grab this edge and pull it out ever so slightly. And it gives it a bit of a bow out. I'm going to grab this and pull this back. Pull this back. And then I'm going to grab these centers. Let's pull this out a little bit. I'm going to take these guys here, pull them out just a little bit. And you should be able to see it. It's going to be really subtle. But I can see that it's not flat. And that gives me a nice little highlight around it when I look around. Oops, looks like I deleted something by accident, but that's really easy to put back in. So the magic question is, what do we need? Everyone should be saying holding edges. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to go in and use the insert edge loop tool. And I'm going to switch it from relative distance, and relative distance places it kind of in between whatever's there. I want to keep this really nice and neat. So I'm going to use equal distant instead. So if I come in and select closer to these edges, it keeps them exactly the same as those edges all the way down. And then I'm probably going to do something similar here on the outside of this, or drop something like this down. Now I'm going to smooth that out. Voila. Now it's all stitched together. I think that feels okay. Again, the shaping may need to change on some of this. We will see as we go. It looks like it needs to come farther forward a little bit. Maybe not. It looks about right from this angle. But you can see now when I look at this, again, this is why I want to have this reference image. It might be hard to see on the recording right now, but this distance is what I'm looking at and the curvature of that. And it feels to me like this wheel well needs to be a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do is come in and grab this front. We're going to play with this here for a second by taking that. And I'm just going to start stretching this out just a little bit, which again is going to kind of ruin some of my shapes. So I'm going to go in and tweak some of this. But by moving some of these edges backwards, it's going to lengthen out the sides a little bit. And I think that's fairly close to what I'm looking for. It's not too far off anyways. Still feel like this can come farther forward in the front. Always nitpicking stuff, always trying to make sure that whatever you're putting onto the model feels correct relative to your reference images. So I'm going to take this and move this forward too. And that feels pretty good to me. So I'm going to take that piece and get rid of it. And let's just check this across. So I'm going to take this, get rid of that. Got all this stuff, let's mirror it across. And this is the toughest part of this entire object. If you can get this section, then we're looking pretty good, right? Again, what we're doing right now isn't perfect, but it feels pretty close to what I've got going on over here, right? So the next thing I guess we can try, any questions? Let me ask that. We got about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that if anyone has questions, kind of what we can do. Quad ball holding edges. All right, I'm going to take some water here for a second. All right, we're going to power on then. So let's talk about the seat. Get rid of this stuff, because now I've got this shape right here. So the way I'm going to start the seat is really easy. I'm just going to select this edge, which goes all the way around, and I'm going to do an extrude, and I'm going to pull it straight up. Now the cool thing is, once I've done that, if I keep that edge alive, like right now, I can hit Control and F11, which selects faces instead. It shifts your selection. So Control F9 will select it and switch it to points. If I hit Control F11, oops, it'll select faces, which is what I want. And I hit Extract, that's set to a hotkey, and it pulls that stuff off. So now what I can do is this. I can, oops, something funky happened there. Hold on, let me undo that. I'm going to do that a different way. Let's do an extrude, and this time I'm going to scale it in on itself. And then we're going to take that and we're going to extract it off. And now it should be clean. I actually hit extrude again by accident. So let's come in, let's grab these edges. And you can see it's selecting all the way around the outside. So sometimes when you use that trick, it rips the faces apart. So what I'm going to do is just come in, grab all those vertices, merge them, double check. Ooh, okay, so what's going on there? This is fun. So you're going to see stuff like this all the time. And when I see this weird kind of banding happening there, and you can see how it feels like a point there, it doesn't feel like it's rounding over. If I go to lighting and turn off two-sided lighting, ooh, my normals are reversed. I'm going to come in on this side and I'm going to say reverse. And now I should be able to take those and smooth them out. Awesome. Little things like that are going to pop up as you model every time, no matter how long you've been doing stuff. And as you go, you start to figure out what's what. So I'm going to pull this up just a little bit. And what I'm creating is kind of this thickness that goes around the seat. Something else I can do is I can just jump straight into my scale tool. If I pull that up, notice how it squashed it just the way I wanted to, or it stretched out the face there just the way I wanted it to a little bit more. And that's kind of what the saddle shape looks like. Coming to the back here, I'm just going to shape some of this manually, dropping some of this stuff down. And I'm going to take this whole piece and put a different shader on it. So I've got some preset shaders that I put together. I should have one called handlebar, which will work well for this. And I'm going to take this object, let's modify center pivot. This will probably be the last thing that we're able to accomplish here today, but that's okay. And I'm going to pull it up ever so slightly. If I look at my reference images, let's turn on two-sided lighting. That's why this stuff disappeared, is because they're actually backwards. I flipped them so they're pointing in the right direction for me. How do I go through and get the rest of the seat? Well, it's going to be as simple as going through and doing another extrude, scaling this stuff in. And just by the nature of the extrude and the scale, it's going to start to give me what I want. I'm going to lengthen this out just a little bit, pull some of this stuff back so it's a little bit more broad towards the front if I need to. I can rotate some of these things like so. So I'd probably pull something like this in about, once, so it comes down like so. And then what I'm going to do is come through and again use my append. And I like to append across. Let me hide everything else when we do this. I like to append across a couple of things, leaving gaps for myself so that I can then add more edge loops without having it run into everything else. So I know I'm going to need one right down the middle here. Hey, that didn't go down the middle. What's going on? Well, remember, I had gone through and I had changed my tool setting in insert edge loop to this equal distant. I want it back to relative distance now. I'm going to drop this down. Let's go into here. Something else I haven't done, which I should do, is I'm going to save my scene because I've been working a long time. If this would have crashed, this example would have gone terribly wrong. So always make sure you're saving stuff. The other thing I'm going to do here is go through and actually, before I cut that down the middle, let's do this one more time. Across here. And I can do it across here. That'll work. Now we can come in and cut with the insert edge loop. Make sure that's set to 0.5. And I have offset edge loop I could also add in here. I think what I'm going to do for right now, though, is just kind of try something like this. Using my append tool. My guess is I won't like this exactly. I'll need to do some shaping on it. But there's a basic seat shape. So you can see kind of what we could do with that after the fact. You can see the bottom of it has a thickness, but it kind of scoops back up and under. That's where this reference becomes really useful to me. I would also probably shape this thing up a little bit differently. I think it's a bit too wide right now. But whatever, we're already kind of in this. So let's just finish this out. Pull some of this forward just a little bit. Okay. So going to the underside, if I want this thing to kind of scallop and scoop like it is already, actually one thing I want to do is move some of this stuff forward. I don't like when some of these faces cut back like this. It's going up and then cuts back really hard. I'm going to move all this stuff up and try to keep it in a nice line. Same with these. I'm going to pull them forward, move them up. It stays kind of in a line. If I need to, I can come in here and I can also grab these corner points, pull this back, drop this down. Anyways, you get the idea. For this, I'm building kind of like a shell, right? But what I'm going to do is just come through. I'm going to duplicate this object. I'm going to drop it straight down. And I want to get rid of this edge here. So I'm going to select that edge. Let's convert to faces. So Control F11, delete those out. So now I basically have a copy of that piece. And I want to get that kind of scallop shape. But if I turn off two-sided lighting, really hard to tell on a dark surface like this. Let me turn off the grid as well. If I go into shading and say use default material, you can see this bottom face is backwards. So let's do a reverse. Now it's facing the right direction. If I come back in and grab this edge and do an extrude, I could pull this in just a little bit. I'm going to drop it down just a little bit, which is going to give it a little bit of thickness. Like so. And maybe that's what I want. Again, we're running out of time here. And then what I can do is probably go in and do one more extrude on this. Scale it in just a little bit like this. And now I'm simply going to combine these two pieces. Actually, I'm going to move this one up a little bit because it looks like the overall thickness of this piece is pretty thin if I look at the reference images. So let's do something like that. I'm going to take these, combine them, and again, let's come in, and now I'm just going to snap to point. And I would go around the entire thing. If I was smart, I would have symmetry turned on right now, but I wasn't that smart. So I'm only going to do half of this, and then I'll mirror it across. Merge those points together, come in, let's grab this, get rid of it, come in here. Oops, still have some stuff back there, grab that. Let's make sure everything looks good. Nice. It's got kind of that round shape that's going on there. Let's take this then, and let's just do a mirror. And I want to combine that, merge those points. All right, so the last thing I want to do on this piece, just to make sure, is I'm going to take this edge and I want this to go up a little bit higher, like so. And I'm going to come in and add an insert edge loop here. I would come in and add insert edge loop here. And when I do that, this is also another case where I might go into my tool setting and go to insert edge loop and turn on that insert with edge flow, so that when I add this one, it's going to kick it out just a little bit. There it goes. And I can actually control how much that does that. I want to do 0.35 instead of 1. Rounds it just a little bit. I can do the same thing here. It's going to round that up a little bit. And I may even come in and do something like that. And now when I look at it, I've got that nice seat shape. The bottom has that kind of flat edge to it. Pull this back up. Let's go ahead and turn our shading back to what it was before. Smooth this bit out, hide this stuff, get rid of that. And now I've got the seat sitting exactly where I want it to sit. So what I like to do at this point is just have a little bit of fun, if you can call it fun. I'm going to set my pivot point towards the back here. And what's cool then is you can go through and we can open this thing up and we can take a look at the other reference. If we turn our two-sided lighting back on, and again, you can start to look and see this kind of bends maybe a little bit too much, whatever. This is not bad for what we're trying to do for right now. You can see some of what's happening there. It's got the same twist, it's got the bend, it's all coming off the body. Now you can also see here there's an edge, there's like a lip, and then an edge comes in. So I would just start using the exact same process that I used for this piece up here to get the interior volume of this shape, right? So if I've already got something that looks like this, I would just come in, extrude, scale it down. That's going to give me that interior lip that this thing sits on, something like that. Extrude again, and I would drop that down, giving myself a holding edge. Just going to do something like so. I probably scale it in just a little tiny bit. Extrude again, I can drop this down, and this is where I want to try to get to a flat. So I'm going to start to use my scale tool, pull this down to the bottom. And if I wanted this to end in a flat shape, which my guess is it probably does at the bottom of this, I would extrude, pull this down, and then eventually I might leave a little bit of roundness to it, something like this, but I'd probably pull this all the way down to the bottom. I may even just scale it a little bit just to give it some shape. I'm in, add my holding edges here, here, and here. I'm going to put one right there too. There we go. So you can see how you'd finish at the bottom. This piece up here is really easy. Again, we got about 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is just tell you about this piece. The way I would approach this up here is the exact same. I would make a piece that looks something similar to this. And in fact, on this, if I was never going to take this piece off, I wouldn't have a bottom on it because the bottom is going to create more problems for me than it's worth. So that when I smooth this out, I could sink this piece down. I'm going to stretch it just a little bit and sink it down completely. And just like I did before, I'd probably have to add more geometry to this. So I'm going to add insert edge loop, probably come in and get rid of that center one then, but I'm simply going to cut around it where it intersects with my other shape, because I want this piece to also sit really flush to the surface. Oops, I shouldn't have drawn that in just yet. But hopefully that makes sense. I would trace around here all the way around so it sits just on top of that surface. And then what I like to do, here, I'll try to do it really quick since we're running out of time. I'll try it, see if what it turns out looking like. It won't be great, but 5 minutes, we're going to make it happen. The cool thing is, once you have your proxy, look how much we've gotten done in the last hour and a half. We spent about 20 minutes talking about that proxy. It probably took me about 30 minutes total, maybe 40 to get the proxy just right. But after that, you're just churning through your modeling skills and kind of going through the same motions over and over and over. But your shape and your form is there. So you don't have to keep stopping to worry about that. You've already figured it all out. All right, so we've got that. It's close. What I'm going to do is kind of pull this up just a little bit like so, because what I want to do for a piece like this, even though this is not finished, I'm not going to be able to finish this because we're just about out of time. I would extrude this, pull it in one more time, and drop it down. What I want is this kind of lip underneath it, and I would add a holding edge here. And I would come in and add a holding edge here. You can see this wobble. I do not like that at all. That's going to show up on my model. It shouldn't be doing that. So what's happening there is it tells me it needs to come out further, like so. And when it comes out further, now I can drop it down further. Right? And I can take this corner and I can drop it down a little bit further. And I would do the same thing around all this stuff, making sure. So this might be coming out too far forward. So I'm going to pull that back, because my goal is to make this stuff as consistent as possible in terms of that little edge that's trying to show. So I think that feels pretty good. And now it kind of sits directly on top of that other piece. I'd have holding edges back here as well. There's a lip, there's things like that back here. Again, you would just grab all this stuff, extrude it in, kind of, hopefully you guys can see it. But anyways, those are the basic approaches that I would take to build a shape like this. Hopefully just from seeing some of this, you guys can figure out what the rest of it might be. We didn't get to talk about, this section back here. But again, the question came up before, well, how do you go through and make sure that this is round? One thing that can make it a little bit easier sometimes is I'll grab stuff, I'll extract it off so it's a separate piece, knowing that later on I'm going to stitch it back together. And let's just look at these two pieces. When I smooth this and I smooth this, are they round? Nope, doesn't look like it, right? So what I would do is come in here and I would slowly start to kind of move my points around until I get a consistent edge all the way around. So this is going to have to come over like this. And you can start to see the problem that I run into. So I'm going to have to move this one up a little bit, this one right there. And you can see these two are really close together. That's going to be problematic. That's not too far off, but this is essentially what you end up having to do. And then what happens is, this is going to have to run through. I didn't finish this shape out. So this would go into something like that over there, which is actually going to help me out, because now I can take that point and manipulate it as well. So I can scoot these guys over a little bit. And my goal is just to get it close. And that feels pretty close. You can see I probably need another one through here if I wanted to keep it nice and round. But to the naked eye, kind of just looking around it, if anyone were to see it, that's round enough to the point where they probably wouldn't be questioning that. So let's just take this and we're going to call this thing done. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully it wasn't too much of me talking about stuff that you guys already know about and kind of feel comfortable with. I just want to show you process of what happens when something gets thrown in front of you and you just kind of have to dive in and see what happens. So thank you guys very much for joining us today. And we hopefully will see you all next time.